Hi, I'm Pratyush More. I work in the Android platform team at Google. I speak 3.3 languages, and over the past few months, I've been working on making Android better for multilingual users like myself. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so any guesses where this photo is from? Just raise your hand, say it out loud. Oktoberfest, Germany, yes. So this is, a young and adventurous me, and I promise that's me, when I was living in Germany a couple years back. But why am I showing you this photo, right? Well, I spoke very little German, right? And I wanted to learn. And what I did was I changed my phone language to German. And I thought, okay, I'm going to make a mistake or two, but I'm going to learn it. And everything was going okay until I had to pay someone some money, right? So I opened my bank app, and I was terrified. I was terrified that I would send the wrong amount of money to the wrong person, or worse still, ask them to send me money instead, right? And so I changed my phone back to English because there was no way to really use some parts of my phone in English and some parts of my phone in German, which is what I really wanted, right? As it turns out, it's not just people who are learning a new language, right, who have such use cases. A lot of multilingual users have the same use cases, right? So this is one we've heard in particular. For example, in the Netherlands, where people want to use maps in their native language because they want the street names in businesses to be pronounced correctly, right? But they still want their phone in English because they're used to using their phone in English, right? So a lot of multilingual users have such user journeys. And when you think of it, multilingualism in the world is the norm. It's not the exception, right? In Europe alone, 64% of people are multilingual, right? Which means that such use cases are actually very, very common. It's not the edge case that we're building for. And so for you, app developers, businesses, multilingualism is a necessity. It's not a nice to have. You must support it. And so, what are we as Android doing to make that better for you and easier for you to do, right? So hold this thought, right? We're going to get back to this user journey of the same phone in multiple languages, but before we get there, we need to get some basics right? Because without that, we can't build anything sophisticated. And the basics start with your app resources, right? You need to ensure that your app resources have the right languages in them, right? The right language support. And for that, we need to speak about locales. So what is a locale? Essentially, it's a combination of a language, a script, and a region, right? A language is something like French, right? It's what most of you have probably heard of that. It's what we use to communicate. A script is what we use as the writing mechanism for that language, right? So the Latin script here is used for French. And a region is some location in the world, right? So you have France or Canada, both speak French, and there could be subtle nuances in each of their versions, right? So for the same language, you could have multiple locales for the region, but also because you can have multiple scripts, right? So Chinese could be written with simplified characters or traditional characters, right? And so you have multiple locales for the same language for various reasons. And what Android allows you to do is specify different translations for each of these locales, right? So generally, when you have some text in your app, you're going to separate that out and decouple it from your code, right? So that text is going to live in a separate file, and some translator would usually translate that to other languages you want to support. Those other languages would be in separate files themselves, which would be under a folder that references usually the language and the region. So over here we have values ZH for Chinese and values ZH for TW for Taiwan, right? But it can also reference the script if you want, right? So it really depends on how granular you want to go and how much you want to support. And finally, you have a default locale. Like let's say you're supporting 5 locales and none of those match what the user want, and you always have a thing to fall back to, which is the default locale. And so this app here, it has 6 locales supported plus the default locale, and that's what you see highlighted, right? There are 7 values there. But an interesting thing that you'll notice if you compile this app and you inspect it is you won't see 6 languages supported. You'll see something like 88, right? So where did these other languages magically come from, right? Well, because you're probably referencing some libraries like AppCompat or Google Play services, right? And those libraries could have resources themselves. And so when you actually compile your app, all of that is going to be pulled in to the same resource table. And even if your app doesn't support more than 6 languages, it'll seem like it does. So the first tip I'm going to share with you today is always specify this configuration. It's called the resource configurations in your Gradle file, and that'll ensure that only the languages you support are included in your APK when you build it, right? So unwanted resources from libraries are stripped out, so Android knows better what you support, but also your APK size shrinks, right, with something as simple as like 2 lines of configuration. So do that. And when you do that, you compile your app, you'll see it's in 6 configurations as expected, right? Okay, so we know about resources now, right? But how do we actually ensure that the translations in the resources are used effectively and in the best way? And how do we ensure the user has a great experience, regardless of the language that they use their app in? And there are a few tips for that. The first is don't concatenate in your code, right? Like if you're an English speaker, you're developing something, you might think that the adjective obviously comes before the noun, right? So if I have something like tall woman, tall comes before woman, so I'm going to split it out, and each one can be translated differently, and everything's working, right? You think you've done something very smart, and who doesn't like to feel smart, but then you move to another language, like French, right? And all of a sudden, the adjective comes after the noun. So if you concatenate in the way shown, you'll end up with something like grand femme, right? But what you really want is femme grand, because the adjective should come after the noun. So don't concatenate. In fact, grand femme could mean something different altogether. Like, it could mean eminent woman instead of tall woman, right? And so, yeah, you could end up in a bit of a tough spot if you do this. In fact, don't reuse short strings at all. So imagine you have some text like print in your app, right? And you're using it in multiple places. You might think I can reference the same string. Why duplicate it? Well, again, let's consider French. Let's say you have a command like a button, and you have print on it. That's going to translate to imprimer, right? Whereas if you have a descriptive element, such as a title or a label, it's going to translate to something totally different, right? So you might think reusing short strings is good, but it's not. So don't do that either. Instead, try to provide independent resources wherever possible. Try to capture the context. And this is the best way that your translators can translate your app effectively and to the highest quality. Finally, we have this tool called message format, right, which helps you with a lot of things like using ordinal numbers, right? Sometimes you want to say the first item instead of one item. And different languages have different numbers that you need to append different strings to, and that can grow exponentially with the number of languages. So use message format for that, for formatting dates, etc., right? Like, please, I think date format confusion should be a thing of the past, so please do that. I'm asking for a friend. Okay, so that's good. I said we'd get back to this use case where we have the same phone in multiple languages, right? And we haven't spoken about that yet. So that brings us to per app language preferences, right? And this is this new swanky thing that we added in Android 13, and I'm going to talk about the ways that you can support that in your app. There are 2 broad ways to do this to make sure that your app supports per app languages. One is inside device settings, so users can go inside the settings app. They can change your app's language, and that's Android 13 and beyond. And the other is actually in-app, right? So you might want to change the language from inside your app. So that's also a possibility. And the best part is that they sync, right? So no matter which option the user employs, they'll work in unison, and everything's going to work out. So let's go through them one by one. So first, in device settings. So as this GIF shows, if you enable this, your app will show up in this list, and the user will be able to choose the language. And so this provides for a centralized and discoverable way to change your app's language, right? Because there's one way, you learn it for one app, it works for all apps. It is opt-in for Android 13, which means that you have to specify something for your app to show up. The way you do that is you declare your app's supported languages. You tell us what languages do you support, and we'll show them, and that's it, right? So how do you do that? But it's super simple, actually. What you have to do is add this line in your manifest. It's a configuration file pointing to an XML. In the XML, you tell us what languages you support, using the language codes, the locale codes that we spoke about earlier. For example, this app supports Bengali, Gujarati, Marathi, and English. And then it'll just show up on the settings page, right? Obviously, the corresponding settings page for your app. And that could be all you need to do, right? That might be enough for you. But optionally, you could also want to enable your users to change the language from inside your app. Let's say at the first time that your app is opened, you ask them, hey, is this really the language you want to use the app in? If not, they could change it, and so you might want some custom UI, and you can do that. Right? So here, we have a drop-down menu where the user can select a language, right? And then you can call an in-app API to actually set that language. And the best part is that this is backwards compatible, right? So if you use this, you can also support users pre-Android 13 all the way to Android 14, all the way to SDK level 14. So how do you actually use this API? Well, let's say the user has selected English here, right? In the callback function for this dropdown, you just use that snippet of code. That's the $1 million piece of code. And what that's doing is English is selected, so I'm going to use the English tag, which is en, and I'm going to call set application locales, and this should just make your application work, right? There is one caveat. As you might expect, users will close your app. They'll open it up, right? And when that happens, they want the language to persist, right? You don't want to ask the user every time what language they want to use their app in. And this works out of the box for Android 13 and beyond. But for backwards compatibility, you have to enable it. And again, the way you do that is through this configuration. There's no code change. All you have to do is add these lines. The highlighted bits are the important parts. And that would delegate storage to Android X, Jetpack, and we'd handle it for you. There's one more thing I want to cover. Some apps already have in-app language pickers. You realize this was something users wanted. You built it, but now you want to align yourself with the platform as well, right? And the way you do that, or there are a few steps you should do to do that. Inside your app, first, migrate to the new runtime APIs. Right? That's using app-compat delegate, which I just showed you. Do a one-time migration of storage, right? So you have some custom storage of the user's preference, right? Call the API to migrate that once, and set auto-store locales to true, right? That's the configuration I showed you. And then to show up in device settings, just specify your supported languages using locale config, right? Again, it's just a configuration, no code changes. And that should be all, right? Now, again, if you don't have an in-app picker, or if you don't want an in-app picker, all you need to do is the third part, which takes all of the number of lines that you, equivalent to the number of languages that you support, and we'll just show this option for you practically for free. So I think everyone should do that last bit, right? The first two depend on your use case and app circumstances. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. So thanks for listening. If you want to know more, we have a YouTube talk and developer documentation, so check that out. That's my Twitter handle, which I definitely didn't create yesterday, just in time for this talk. And I also want to acknowledge my colleague Ash Nohi, who's lent a lot of her sides to me. So give her a follow on Twitter as well. Thank Thank you. I'll stay around for questions, and so you can come up and have a chat about languages, Android, or even just say hi.